The first thing Commander Vetheras did when she came aboard the captured human vessel was laugh. Not her species' version of laughter, the low harmonic purr that passed for amusement among the Tyrusian officer caste, but a genuine, full-chested sound, something she had learned from 17 years of studying human media. She had become very good at mimicking human expressions. She was proud of that. She stepped through the airlock of the drifting shuttle and saw the hand-painted tally marks on the bulkhead above the weapons locker. 23 marks, then a gap, then 9 more, and she touched one with 2 fingers and made the sound. "Terran warrior legends," she said to her second, Kale, who stood at her shoulder in full armor. "They count their kills on the walls, like animals marking territory." Kale made no sound. He was new to this posting, still carrying the careful silence of a soldier who has not yet formed opinions about his commander. Vetheras didn't mind. She had stopped requiring her officers to perform agreement years ago. What she required was competence, and Kale had plenty. She walked the length of the shuttle. It was small, a scout vessel, by the look of it, built for 2 occupants and short-range reconnaissance. The seats were worn through at the pressure points. Someone had repaired the left console panel with thermal adhesive that didn't quite match the original plating. On the floor near the co-pilot's seat, a paper cup with a dried ring of coffee at the bottom. A human touch she recognized from 1,000 archived recordings. "Look at this," she said, picking up the cup. "They fly to the edge of a combat zone in vessels held together with adhesive and hope, drinking heated bean water, and then they write songs about themselves." Kale looked at the cup. "The vessel did defeat 3 of our scouts before we disabled it." "Luck," Vetheras said. "Desperation, those are not the same as skill." She set the cup down. She had studied humanity for a long time, longer than most Tyrusian commanders thought worthwhile. She had watched their old wars. Their ancient ones fought with gunpowder and steel, and the newer ones fought with machines, and the newer ones still that had moved partly into space before her people arrived. She understood human endurance. She understood their stubbornness, their irritating refusal to accept mathematical certainty when it argued against their survival. What she did not understand, what she had spent 17 years failing to find evidence for, was the thing her junior officers whispered about in transit corridors. The thing that showed up in intercepted human communications and second-hand reports from Tyrusian scouts who had gotten too close to human defensive lines and come back changed. The legend of the Terran warrior. Not a soldier, not a combatant, something older than that. Something the humans themselves seemed only half aware of, a capacity that existed below the surface of their ordinary people and only revealed itself under specific conditions. The conditions, as best Vetheras had parsed them from fragmented reports and 3 years of analyzing battlefield data, seemed to involve the removal of all other options. She didn't believe in it. She believed in data, and the data said that humanity's military capacity, while impressive for a pre-interstellar species, was exactly what the models predicted. They were strong within parameters. They broke under sufficient pressure. They bled and they died and they surrendered, and the ones who didn't were statistical outliers, not proof of legend. She left the shuttle and went to prepare for the interrogation. His name was Sergeant Marcus Hale, and he had been sitting in the holding cell for 11 hours when Vetheras walked in. She had read his file. 34 years old, from a place called Wyoming in the American interior. 11 years of service. 3 combat deployments before the Tyrusian contact event. 2 commendations, 1 formal reprimand for insubordination. He had argued with a superior officer about abandoning a wounded soldier during extraction, refused a direct order, and gone back for the man himself. The reprimand had been downgraded to a notation after the rescued soldier died anyway from his wounds, as if the outcome had changed the question of what the act meant. She found that interesting. She had flagged it in his file 2 weeks ago when his unit had first appeared on her tactical maps. He was seated on the bench along the cell wall, hands resting open on his knees, and he was looking at the floor. Not in defeat. She had seen defeat in human prisoners, the way it pulled at the muscles around the eyes and mouth, the subtle collapse of posture. This was something else. He looked like a man who had run through a problem several times in his head and was now resting, waiting for the one thing he hadn't thought of to arrive. He looked up when she entered. She sat down across from him, in a chair her people had brought in for this purpose. No table between them. She had found tables created false formality that made humans retreat into scripted responses. She wanted him to talk to her as he actually was. "Sergeant Hale," she said in English. Her English was flawless. She had worked very hard on it. He looked at her for a moment. She was tall by human standards, 2 meters and a few centimeters, pale-skinned in the way that Tyrusian officer caste tended toward, silver-gray at the temples of otherwise dark hair. She had been told she passed for human at a glance. She did not, at a second glance. There was something about the proportions that registered wrong, though humans usually couldn't identify exactly what. "Commander," he said, not a question. He had read her rank insignia. She was mildly impressed. "You led the team that destroyed Relay Station Keth 3 weeks ago," she said. He was quiet. "You also extracted your full unit from the collapse of Forward Post 7, when our second wave overran the defensive line. 6 soldiers, including 2 who couldn't walk on their own. You carried one of them yourself for 4 kilometers through broken terrain in the dark." "Nothing. I'm not asking you to confirm those things," she said. "I know they happened. I'm telling you that I've been watching your unit because I find you interesting." He looked at her, not the way frightened prisoners looked, sharp, brittle, but with a kind of measuring patience. "What do you want to know?" "I want to know," she said, "what it feels like." A pause. What feels like? Whatever it is that makes you go back for the wounded man. Whatever it is that decides to carry a 200-pound soldier through 4 kilometers of hostile terrain when the mathematically correct choice is to leave him and move faster. She leaned forward slightly. "I've studied your people for 17 years. I understand almost everything about you, but I cannot find this thing in the data. I want to understand where it comes from." Hale was quiet for a long time. "You're asking the wrong question," he finally said. "Then ask me the right one." He looked up at the ceiling of the cell. "You want to know where it comes from, like it's a thing I carry around, like it's in a pocket somewhere." He looked back at her. "You ever try to do something you were pretty sure you couldn't do?" "Yes." "Then you know it's not about being able to. It's about," he stopped, searched. "It's about not being able to live with the other thing. That's all it is." She considered this. "You would rather die carrying him than live without having tried." "I'd rather not have to make that choice," he said, with a flat honesty that she found unexpectedly disarming. "But yeah, more or less." She stood. She had what she came for, not information, which she had not expected him to provide, but something else. A texture. A confirmation of the thing she was still mostly sure didn't matter. At the door, she paused without turning around. "You're going to be transferred to the facility on the coast tomorrow," she said. "I wanted you to know that. I thought it was courteous." "How long?" he said. "Until the occupation is complete. Perhaps 2 years, perhaps less." She heard him exhale. "You think it's already decided?" "Yes," she said. "The mathematics are very clear." She left him there. She went back to the command deck and reviewed the afternoon's tactical reports and ate her meal and slept 4 hours in her bunk. And she thought, just before sleep, about the paper coffee cup on the floor of the human shuttle, dried ring at the bottom, and the tally marks on the bulkhead, and what it meant that someone had thought to count. The transfer never happened. At 3:40 the next morning, the perimeter alarm went off. Vetheras was out of her bunk and into partial armor in 40 seconds. She had practiced this, the way her people's military culture demanded of officers above the rank of sub-commander. She was on the command deck in 90 seconds, and what she saw on the tactical display stopped her in the doorway. 14 human vehicles, ground-based, moving fast along the coastal approach from 3 directions simultaneously. "They knew our position," said her tactical officer Rien, who was very good at stating obvious things. "Command, the outer post is not responding." "I heard the alarm," Vetheras said, moving to her station. "How long before they reach the perimeter?" "At current speed, 11 minutes. Command, we have a problem with The lights went out. Not the emergency lights. Not a power fluctuation. Everything, the displays, the overhead panels, the perimeter fence, the security locks on every door in the facility. Complete darkness, complete silence, for exactly 2 seconds before the backup generators engaged and gave them emergency red. In the red dark, Vetheras stood very still. "They hit our power coupling," said Rien, somewhere to her left. "It's an EMP device, localized. They must have placed it during the day cycle. Someone got inside the perimeter." Vetheras thought about this. She thought about how many people on her staff had moved through the facility in the last 24 hours. She thought about the coastal road and the 3-direction approach and the 11-minute window. She thought about a man who had extracted a full unit from a collapsed position by refusing to accept the parameters of the situation. "Get me a head count of the facility," she said quietly. "Every Tyrusian staff member verified. Do it now." Rien moved. Vetheras pulled her sidearm from its holster and stood in the red emergency light and waited. The head count came back in 4 minutes. Everyone was accounted for, every Tyrusian staff member. No human prisoners. The cell block reported all locks disengaged. The EMP had blown them open the moment power cut. Of course it had. She had thought the transfer order was courtesy. She had not considered that it was also intelligence. She had told him when he was being moved. She had told him the mathematics were clear. She had given a man who was very good at solving problems a specific piece of information to solve. She pulled on her helmet. "Defend the perimeter," she said. "I'm going to the cell block." He wasn't in the cell block. She moved through it fast, her sidearm up, her boots on the gritty floor in the dark. 4 empty cells. 1 cell door that had been jammed deliberately. The EMP blew the electronic lock, but the manual bar had been pushed through the handle and wedged with what appeared to be a piece of the bunk frame. She had to kick it twice to get it open. Inside, nothing. She moved to the back corridor. The emergency exit at the end of the block was open, propped with a length of pipe. She went through it into the cold coastal air. The facility sat on a headland. To the north, the access road. To the east, steep rock dropping to water. She could hear the noise of the perimeter engagement from the north, her troops meeting the human vehicles, weapons fire, the sharp crack of Tyrusian pulse energy. She looked east. There was a figure on the rocks. He was moving toward the cliff edge, not away from it. She didn't understand that for 3 seconds, and then she did. He wasn't trying to escape down the rock face. He was trying to reach something on the rocks below. She ran. She was faster than a human. This was simply physics. Tyrusian musculature was denser at the upper end of the officer caste, built for the heavier gravity of Tyrus, which meant on Earth she had more force per stride than a human of equivalent mass. She crossed the headland in 20 seconds, reached the rocks in 30, and came over the lip of the promontory with her sidearm raised and found Sergeant Marcus Hale standing in the dark, 3 meters below the cliff top, on a 2-meter ledge of rock above a drop of 40 meters to black water, and he was holding something that looked like a signal relay pack, and he was in the process of wiring it. He looked up at her. "You're faster than I expected," he said. "Come up from there." He didn't move. He looked at the relay pack in his hands, then back up at her. He had, she noticed with some part of her that was not focused on the sidearm, managed to steal a jacket from somewhere in the facility. It was someone's duty jacket, too large, and he'd pushed up the sleeves. "Come up from there," she said again. "The perimeter defense will hold. Your people are going to lose this assault." "Probably," he said. "Then what are you doing?" He turned the relay pack over in his hands. "You have a satellite repeater on the eastern face of this building, running continuously. We've been trying to find the frequency for 6 weeks. He held up the pack. "Found it 2 hours ago when your power went down and the emission signature shifted. Turns out your backup generator runs on a different harmonic than your primary system. Very distinctive." Vethera's was quiet for 1 second. "The assault wasn't an extraction," she said. "The assault was a distraction," he said, "so I'd have time to do this." He looked back at the relay pack. "The frequency carries your fleet's operational communications. All of it. All the way up the chain. And I've got a pretty interesting message I'd like to send." She descended to the ledge. She had to holster her sidearm to do it. She needed both hands on the rock, and she was aware that this was a risk, and she accepted it because the distance between them was 3 meters and she was faster, and the relay pack was more important than the sidearm. She landed on the ledge, and the rock was cold and slick with ocean spray, and she kept her footing and straightened. He had not run. He was still at the far end of the ledge, the relay pack in his hands, looking at her. The water below them was very far down. The sounds of the perimeter engagement were muffled now, caught by the headland and deflected. "Give me the pack," she said. "You said the mathematics were very clear," he said. "They are. What are the odds I survive this conversation?" She looked at him. She had spent 17 years studying humans, and she found, standing on a cold rock ledge above 40 meters of dark water with the sound of the battle carried on the wind, that she was not performing any of her usual assessments. She was just looking at him. "Genuinely uncertain," she said. "What you do next will determine them." "That's a more honest answer than I expected," he said. "I'm trying something," she said. She didn't say what she was trying. She wasn't entirely sure herself. He set the relay pack down on the rock beside his left boot. He didn't hand it to her. He set it down and stepped back from it, giving her the choice of crossing to it, and she understood that this was a specific kind of offer, not surrender, an acknowledgement of the situation. She crossed to the pack and picked it up, and he stayed where he was. They stood on the ledge above the water. She held the relay pack. He had his hands loose at his sides. "What was the message?" she said. "Audio file," he said. "Recorded by a man named Kalusha. Broadcast date 12 years ago." She was very still. Kalusha, the name was not unknown to her. It was the name that certain factions within the Tyrusian fleet still said quietly, in the way you said the name of something that had been decided but not finished. The emperor who had come to Earth seeking peace, who had been declared a traitor by the Dragets Council, whose wife was a human woman and whose son was somewhere in the world below. "How did you get that?" she said. "Doesn't matter how," he said. "What matters is what it says. It's a full account of what Kalusha learned about Earth in the time he was here, what humanity is, what your people are risking by doing this." He paused. "He thought your fleet would stop if they heard it from him. He thought it was worth trying." "The Draget would suppress it," she said. "Not if it's already on your fleet frequency. Not if every ship in your orbit hears it at the same time." He looked at her. "That's what the relay was for." She stood with the pack in her hands, and the wind off the water cold on the exposed skin at her collar, and the sounds of the perimeter engagement dying down, which meant either her forces had held or the human assault had achieved its secondary objective and was withdrawing. She had been right that the mathematics were clear. She had not been right about what they were calculating. "The message is in the pack," he said. "Already queued. I had it ready before the power went down. You can delete it, or you can let me show you how to broadcast it." She looked down at the pack. "Why would I do that?" "Because you spent 17 years studying us," he said, "and I don't think what you found was a reason to destroy us." She was quiet for a long time. Below them, the water moved against the rock in slow, rhythmic collision. She had not heard that sound since she was very young, on a different world, on a shore that no longer existed because Tyrus had used its own resources past the point of return. She did not think about that often. She had trained herself not to. She thought about it now. "Show me," she said. The broadcast took 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Vethera stood on the cold rock ledge and held the relay pack and watched the signal strength indicator and did not speak. Sergeant Hale stood 2 meters from her and also did not speak. The encoding was simple. She could have interrupted it at any point. She did not interrupt it. She had met Kalusha once briefly, at a formal ceremony years before his declaration as a traitor. She had been a junior officer then. She had not paid particular attention to him. She paid attention now, to the recording of his voice that came through the pack's small speaker just loud enough for her to hear. Measured, deliberate, speaking to his own people with the patience of a man who expected to be argued with and had decided to make his argument anyway. He spoke about Earth, not its strategic value, not its resource yield, not the tactical assessment she had written herself in 3 separate reports over the past decade. He spoke about what humans did when you left them alone. What they built, what they argued about, what they created and destroyed and created again. The way they held on to things, love, grudges, stories, songs, past any reasonable point of utility, past the point of sense, deep into the territory of stubbornness that he had spent years trying to understand and had eventually accepted as simply the shape of them. He said, "I came here afraid of what we would find, and I found something I was not equipped to be afraid of. I found something I was only equipped to admire." He said, "We are dying because we could not stop using what we had. They are surviving because they cannot stop making more." He said, "I am asking you to consider what it would mean to be the kind of people who destroy that. I am asking you to consider whether that is who we want to be." He said, "I am recording this because I know there are people listening who are not sure. This is for them." The signal completed. The indicator light went dark. Vethera stood on the ledge with the pack in her hands. "He made it 12 years ago," she said. "He made about 40 of them," Hale said, "over the years, in case he ever found a way to get them through. He never found a way. He never found the right frequency," he said. "His son did." She looked at him, his son. Kid's 19, smart, angry. He said it with something in his voice that wasn't quite pride but was in that neighborhood. "He's why your scout units in the eastern sector keep losing their signal locks. He's been running interference on your communication grid for 8 months. A pause. That's where he found the frequency." Vethera's thought about a boy who was half Dirusian and half human, and had been trying to get his father's voice through the fleet communication grid for 8 months. She thought about what that required, technically, logistically, personally. She thought about the part of the human file she had never found an explanation for, the part that showed up in after-action reports as an anomaly, the part that her models had always tagged as statistical noise. "You knew the assault would fail," she said. "It was not a question." "I knew the assault would probably fail," he said. "Yes. And you came out here anyway." He looked at the water. "I didn't have any better option." She understood then, not from the data, not from 17 years of study, not from the files, not from the archived recordings. From the specific timbre of his voice when he said those words, "I didn't have any better option," which was not despair and was not bravado and was something underneath both of those things, something that preceded them, the thing that decided. The thing she had not been able to find in the data because the data was made of outcomes, and this was the thing that existed before the outcome, before the assessment, Before the mathematics. She set the relay pack down on the ledge. Your perimeter team withdrew 8 minutes ago, she said. My forces are resecuring the facility. I know, he said. You are still my prisoner. I know that too. She looked at him. He looked back at her, and there was, in the set of his jaw, in the particular way he held himself on the wet rock ledge above 40 meters of dark water in someone else's jacket with his hands loose at his sides, something that she recognized from nowhere in her files, nowhere in her research, nowhere in 17 years of study. It was new to her. It would take her a long time to find a word for it. The closest she would eventually get in her own language was something that translated approximately as, still counting. I am going to need to report the broadcast, she said. I cannot pretend it did not occur. I know. I do not know what the fleet will do with it. No, he said, that's the point. She picked up the relay pack. She helped him up from the ledge, not because he needed the help, but because it seemed like the right thing to do, and she realized, trying something. And the thing she was trying had to do with what it meant to not be able to live with the other option. They stood on the headland in the dark, the facility lit in emergency red behind them, the ocean below. What happens now, he said. Now you go back to the cell, she said, and I write a report, and we see what comes next. That's it. That's quite a lot, she said, given this morning. He almost smiled. She could see it, the beginning of one, the thing that didn't quite get there because the situation didn't quite allow it. She had seen that particular expression in 100 archived recordings, and she knew what it meant. Later, maybe, when there's something to smile about. She walked him back across the headland. Her troops met them at the facility entrance, and she waved off their weapons with one hand and they stood down, uncertain, watching their commander walk through the door with a human prisoner who was also not quite a prisoner, and carrying a relay pack that she did not explain. She put him back in the cell herself. She did not jam the door. The response from the fleet took 9 days. In those 9 days, Vethera wrote her report 4 times. The first 3 versions omitted the broadcast. The 4th version included it. She submitted the 4th version. In those 9 days, she also read everything she could find about Kalusha. This was more difficult than it should have been. A significant portion of the official record had been revised after his declaration as a traitor, the kind of revision that left visible absences, gaps in the chronology, references to events with no events attached. She found the shape of him in the negative space, a ruler who had refused the invasion. A man who had come to Earth as a diplomat and stayed as something she didn't have a precise word for. A man who had trusted an ordinary human woman in a desert and had, according to an 8-year-old field report she found buried in a logistics archive, once killed a mangler with his bare hands in a cave somewhere in Utah, which she found privately extraordinary. She also spoke to Hale twice more in the 9 days. Not interrogation, conversation. She brought him decent food the second time. She had acquired it from the facility kitchen by the simple method of asking, which her staff found mildly alarming. She asked him about Wyoming. He talked for 45 minutes about a landscape she had only seen in archive images. She asked him what the elevation was. She had always found atmospheric pressure data interesting, and he told her, and then told her about the quality of the light in the high country in early morning, which was not data she had required but which she listened to anyway. The way he talked about it had the texture of something he was trying not to lose, even in this place, even in this situation. She understood that. She had her own things she tried not to lose. On the 9th day, the fleet response came. Vethera read it twice, standing at her station in the command deck in full daylight, her officers carefully not looking at her. The message was from the fleet commander, Admiral Kethvor, who reported that the broadcast had been received across all vessels simultaneously, as designed, and that the initial response among fleet personnel had been, in his words, divided. That there had been arguments. That there were officers who knew the name Kalusha and who had been waiting 17 years for someone to make his argument through a channel that couldn't be suppressed. The message reported that the Draget had ordered a full inquiry into the breach of fleet communication security. It reported that 3 ship commanders had formally requested a convening of the Tyrusian High Council to review the legal basis for the occupation order. It reported that nothing had been decided. It reported that everything was in motion. Vetheras set the message down. She looked at the tactical display. The occupation grid was intact. The perimeter was secure. Her forces held every position they had held yesterday. And nothing was the same. She went to the cell. He looked up when she came in, the same measuring patience, the same waiting quality. He had spent 9 days in a cell, and he looked like a man who had used the time well, which was exactly the kind of thing she had given up trying to explain away. "Well," he said. She sat down in the chair across from him. "Nothing has been decided," she said. He nodded. "There may be a council review. It could take months. It could be overruled." She paused. "The Draget's position within the fleet is strong. I don't want to tell you this is over." "It's not over," he said. "I know it's not over." "Then why?" she said and stopped. "Why what?" She had been going to ask why he had done it, knowing it wasn't over, knowing the broadcast might be suppressed or overruled or simply not enough. She stopped because she already knew the answer. He had told her on the ledge. "I didn't have any better option, and before that in the cell the first night. I'd rather not have to make that choice. But yeah." She looked at him. She thought about the tally marks on the bulkhead of the scout ship, and the paper coffee cup, and the 45 minutes about the light in the high country, and a man who had gone back for someone he couldn't save and been given a formal notation in his file for it, as if the act were data instead of a question about what you could live with. "I owe you something," she said. "You don't owe me anything." "I dismissed the legends of Terran warriors," she said. "I thought it was mythology. I spent 17 years telling myself it was statistical noise." She looked at her own hands for a moment, then back at him. "I was wrong about what you are. I don't think I was wrong about the mathematics. I think the mathematics may have been wrong about you." He didn't say anything. He had the look of a person receiving something unexpected who hadn't decided yet what to do with it. "The son," she said. "Kalusha's son, what's his name?" A pause. "David." "Is he safe?" "As safe as anyone, I think. He moves around." He looked at her. "Why?" "Because the council inquiry, if it proceeds, will want him," she said. "He is the only living direct lineage of the Emperor's line on the side of the peace faction. He carries weight that I don't, that the 3 ship commanders don't." She paused. "He also has a father's voice in a relay pack. That will matter." "You're helping us," Hale said, and it wasn't an accusation, just a statement checking it. "I'm not sure what I'm doing," she said, with a precision she felt was honest. "I've never done this before." "Neither have I," he said. "You're good at it," she said. He did smile then. The full version, the one the situation hadn't quite allowed on the headland. It changed his face, made him look younger, made him look like the before version of the man who'd been in the desert and the collapsed forward post and the scout ship counting kills on the bulkhead. "I've had practice," he said, "not having better options." "I know," she said. "I read your file." "All of it?" "The reprimand about the wounded soldier," she said. "I flagged it 2 weeks ago. I thought it was interesting." He looked at her steadily. "He died anyway." "I know that too," she said. It was still interesting. The silence between them was different from the silences before, lighter somehow, like the atmospheric pressure had changed. She noticed it and didn't know what to do with it, which was unusual for her. She was good at knowing what to do with most things. She stood up. "I'm going to request that your status be reclassified," she said. I'll need you to give a formal account of how you obtained and deployed the relay pack. The council inquiry will want a complete record. And after that? After that, she said, is after that. She went to the door. Commander, he said. She paused. The message, he said. Did you listen to all of it? Yes. What did you think? She stood in the doorway for a moment. The red emergency lighting had been replaced with normal daylight cycles 3 days ago, and the corridor outside was ordinary, functional, unremarkable. She looked at it. I thought, she said, that he understood something I had been trying not to know. She left him there. She walked back to the command deck and sat at her station and looked at the tactical display, at the occupation grid that was intact and unchanged, and at the fleet designations hanging in high orbit above the planet, and she thought about everything that was in motion. On the 3rd day, she brought him a tablet with unrestricted access to the facility's archived human media library. This was not protocol. There was no category in the facility's operating procedures for this. It fell in the negative space between prisoner comfort provisions and intelligence security, and she had decided privately that it fit there well enough. She handed it to him without explanation. He took it without asking for one. She noticed on her next visit that he had been reading military history. Not recent history, old history, the kind that predated any possibility of relevance to the current conflict. He had a dozen articles open in different tabs, some of them spanning thousands of years. She looked at the titles without comment. My grandfather was a historian, he said, watching her look. Not professionally, he just liked it. What kind of history? Lost causes, he said. He had a theory that they were more instructive than the victories. Anyone can learn from winning. The interesting stuff is in why people kept fighting when they should have quit. She sat in the chair across from him, and the answer was almost always the same. It wasn't strategy. It wasn't resources. He closed one of the tabs. It was that they believed the alternative was worse. She thought about the planet Tyrus, about the resource depletion reports she had read as a junior officer, the classified projections, the timetables that had kept getting extended and then extended again, and then, quietly, removed from general circulation because the numbers were not a question of if, but when. She thought about the Draget's argument, that Earth was the alternative, that Earth was the only option. She thought about how many decisions she had made and how many orders she had followed, because someone had told her there was no other option. Your grandfather, she said, is he still alive? No, he said. He died when I was 11. He used to tell me about these sieges, medieval ones, some of them, where everyone outside the walls knew the city was going to fall, and the people inside just kept going. He said the thing that always got him was that they weren't stupid. They knew the math. They just decided the math wasn't the whole story. He sounds like he was interesting. He was impossible, Hale said, with the warmth of someone describing a thing they loved by saying what frustrated them about it. He'd argue about anything. He once got into a 2-hour argument with a museum docent about whether a specific 16th century general made the right call at a particular battle. Who won the argument? Nobody. He'd have said that was the point. He set the tablet down. He'd have liked you, I think. He liked people who studied things carefully and still ended up surprised. She was quiet for a moment. I'm not sure I like being surprised, she said. Neither was he, Hale said. But he didn't think that meant you should stop looking. On the 5th day, her second officer Cale knocked at her office door and came in with the careful posture of someone carrying news they were uncertain how to deliver. She set down her work and looked at him. The Draget's office has sent a query, he said, regarding the Hale prisoner. What kind of query? They want him transferred to the central detention facility by the end of the week. Cale hesitated. The query is marked Priority 1. Vetharas said nothing for a moment. She looked at the query on the screen Kale was holding. It was terse, as Dragic communications always were. He was not a man who used words as anything other than instruments, which was one of the things that had always made her privately wary of him. He used people the same way. What's the reason given? Intelligence asset, Kale said. They want to debrief him on the broadcast event. She understood what that meant. The Dragit's intelligence staff were thorough. The Dragit's intelligence staff did not bring people back. File an administrative delay, she said. Inquiry into the relay pack breach is ongoing, and the prisoner is a material witness. I cannot release him while my own report is incomplete. Kale looked at her. He was new, but he was not unintelligent. That will hold for approximately 72 hours, he said. I know, she said. After he left, she sat for a long time without moving. She thought about the inquiry. She thought about the timeline. She thought about 3 ship commanders who had filed a council review request and who were currently, according to this morning's tactical update, in a holding pattern near the outer edge of the occupation zone, which was not where they were supposed to be. She thought about the word something and whether it could be made to move faster. On the 7th day, she did something she had not done in 11 years of active service. She wrote a private message directly to the 3 ship commanders. The message was not long. It outlined, precisely and without editorializing, the administrative situation at the facility, the prisoner, the inquiry, the Dragit's query, the 72-hour window. It stated, without recommendation, that the council review request would be significantly stronger if it had direct access to the material witness before that window closed. It stated, without elaboration, that the material witness had been the primary architect of the broadcast event and could speak to its origins in ways that documentary evidence alone could not. She sent it on a private channel that predated the current occupation infrastructure and had not been updated in the routing tables for 6 years. It was not, technically, a covert channel. It was simply one that had not been checked recently. She told herself this was a reasonable distinction. She mostly believed it. The response came back in 4 hours, from the most senior of the 3 ship commanders, Admiral Provisional Telm, whose name she knew from his service record as someone who had also served under Kalusha's command authority in the years before the declaration. It contained 2 words. Understood, coming. She filed the administrative delay. She went to the cell. She sat across from Hale and looked at him for a moment without speaking. Something's changed, he said. It wasn't a question. Things may move faster than I expected, she said, in either direction. He nodded slowly. How much time do we have? 72 hours to be meaningful, possibly less. She paused. The Dragit wants you transferred. He was quiet. He understood what that meant. She could see it in the way his expression didn't change. The specific steadiness that was not the absence of feeling but its containment. What happens if the council review doesn't go through? He said. Then nothing I can do will matter, she said. I want to be honest about that. I appreciate it. You don't seem frightened, she said. I'm frightened, he said. I'm just not surprised. This is how it usually goes. You do the thing, and then you find out if the thing worked, and while you're waiting, you're pretty frightened. He looked at the wall. My unit used to have a saying, all plans look great until you execute them. After that, it's mostly improvisation. Your species improvises well. We improvise constantly, he said. We don't have a choice. We're too small and too slow and too breakable to do anything on the first try. He looked back at her. That's the part your studies miss, I think. It's not that we're tough. It's that we get to practice failing a lot. She thought about this. The tally marks, she said. He raised an eyebrow. On the bulkhead of your scout vessel, she said. When I came aboard, I counted them. 23, then a gap, then 9. I assumed they were kill counts. They were, he said, 23 successful missions. The gap is for the 4 we lost, 9 after that. You marked the losses differently. Yeah. As absences, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Yeah, he said. That's exactly right. She stood. The council ship will be here in approximately 38 hours. I need you rested, coherent, and capable of explaining everything clearly to people who will be skeptical of you. I can do that, including explaining how a human soldier obtained a 12-year-old Tyrusian emperor's audio archive. He almost smiled. That's a longer story. We have 38 hours. Then I'll start from the beginning, he said. You want coffee? She paused. She thought about the dried ring in the paper cup on the floor of the shuttle. She thought about what it meant that the first thing he reached for, in a holding cell under armed occupation on his own planet, was an offer of something warm. Yes, she said, I'll see what the kitchen has. The council ship arrived in 31 hours, not 38. Vethera's was on the command deck when it dropped into low orbit, and she watched its designation appear on the tactical display, and she felt something that she would later classify, in her private journal, as relief. At the time, she had no word for it. It was simply the sensation of a variable resolving in the right direction. Admiral Provisional Teln came down in a transport with a staff of 6 and a legal recorder, and an expression that Vethera's recognized from very few faces in her career. The look of someone who had made a decision they were not fully certain about, and had decided the uncertainty didn't change anything. They met in the facility's conference room, which had been designed for Tyrusian military use and was therefore somewhat large for 3 people, but no one commented on this. Teln sat. Vethera's sat. The legal recorder's equipment hummed quietly in the corner. You took a risk, Teln said. Yes, she said. The Draget's query came through to Fleet Command 4 hours ago. He's asking questions about the private channel message. I assumed he would. Teln looked at her steadily. He was older than her by 15 years, and had the face of someone who had spent most of those years watching things go wrong in specific ways and calibrating accordingly. You understand what you're putting in motion, he said. I understand it imperfectly, she said, which is the most honest answer I can give. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, Kalusha trusted humans. He was right too, she said. You've been here 18 months, you're certain of that. I'm certain of one human, she said. I believe that is enough to be going on with. Teln looked down at the table for a moment. When he looked up again, something had settled in his expression, the specific settling of a man who has found the ground he intends to stand on. Bring him in, he said. Marcus Hale walked into the conference room in the oversized duty jacket, which he still hadn't exchanged for anything better, and sat across from an alien admiral and a Tyrusian fleet commander, and he told the story from the beginning. He told it without notes. He told it clearly and in sequence, and he didn't soften anything. Not the parts about the assault that had failed, not the parts about his own team's losses in the months prior, not the part where he had been genuinely uncertain if the broadcast would matter or if he would be dead before he found out. He told it the way her grandfather, she imagined, would have told the story of a 16th-century general's questionable decision at a specific battle, with the understanding that the facts were the facts, and the interesting question was what a person did with them. He told them about David, about a 19-year-old kid, half human and half Tyrusian, who had been running interference on fleet communications for 8 months with equipment he had built himself from salvaged parts and a technical education that was approximately 40% formal schooling and 60% desperation, who had found the frequency by accident when the facility's power grid went down and the emission signature shifted, who had handed him the relay pack through a contact network that Hale declined to name in detail, but described in sufficient structural terms that Teln's legal recorder would have what it needed. He told them what was in the audio file. He didn't play it, he didn't have it anymore. Vethera's had the relay pack, but he described it with the precision of a man who had listened to it many times, privately, alone, in the dark of a forward operating base that smelled like machine oil and damp earth, trying to understand what it meant that a being from another world had said, in careful measured language, that he had come expecting to be afraid, and had ended up admiring instead. When Hale finished, the room was quiet for a long time. Teln looked at Vethera's. "Play the file," he said. She took the relay pack from the case at her side and set it on the table and found the cued audio and pressed play. And for 4 minutes and 11 seconds, the voice of Kalusha filled the conference room of a Tyrusian military facility on the coast of a planet his people were in the process of occupying, while a human sergeant and 2 Tyrusian officers sat in the particular silence of people hearing something they already partly knew. When it ended, Teln sat with his hands flat on the table and didn't speak for a while. "He made 40 of these," he said finally, "not a question." 43, Hale said. "David has all of them." Teln looked at him. "And where is David now?" "Safe," Hale said, "moving. He won't stay put, which is honestly probably the smartest thing about him. We need him to stay put long enough for the council to speak with him." Hale was quiet for a moment. "That depends," he said carefully, "on whether the council is offering him something worth standing still for." Teln looked at Vethera's. "The 3 of us are going to have a long conversation about what that offer looks like," he said. "I'd like the sergeant present for all of it." "He's not a diplomat," she said. "No," Teln said. "That's exactly why I want him there." She looked at Hale. He had the expression of a man who had not planned for this specific turn, but who had, as he had told her, substantial practice at improvisation. He gave her the small nod of someone who is ready to try the thing, even uncertain of the outcome. She thought about what her grandfather would have made of this moment, the grandfather she had not had, the one she had invented from 45 minutes of conversation about high country life. She thought he would have wanted to take notes. "Then we'll begin," she said. In the weeks between the conference room and the council hearing, Vethera's learned something she had not expected, that the business of trying to stop a war was nearly identical, in its practical texture, to the business of prosecuting one. Same hours, same cold assessment of which variables could be moved and which were fixed, and which were only apparently fixed until someone decided they weren't. She drafted documents. She coordinated with Teln's staff and with legal advisors, and with a communications specialist who spent 4 days analyzing the broadcast's technical footprint, which yielded 42 pages of annotated findings. She fielded 17 separate inquiries from the Draget's office, each one more precisely threatening than the last, each answered with the calm precision of someone who had already made her decision, and stopped the part of her mind that second-guessed it. She visited Hale twice more before the transfer to the neutral council vessel. The second time, he was different, less contained, more present, as if the decision to testify had moved something from the category of waiting into the category of doing. He asked her about the council voting structure, about what the Draget could legally challenge if the hearing went against him. She answered everything honestly, including the parts where the honest answer was, "Nothing is guaranteed." "What's your read on the 3 ship commanders?" he asked in the second-to-last visit. "Honestly." "Teln is genuine," she said. "The other 2 are cautious. They want to be on the right side of this. They're not entirely sure which side that is yet." "That's most people," he said. "In any situation. You need the ones who are certain, but you need the uncertain ones more. The people who are certain already know what they're going to do. The people who aren't sure yet are still making up their minds, and those are the minds you can actually reach." He looked at his hands. That's what Kalusha understood. He wasn't arguing with the Draget. He was arguing to everyone listening who hadn't decided yet. She thought about this long after she left the cell. She thought about it on the transport to the neutral vessel and in the narrow bunk in her assigned quarters, listening to the different cycling sound of recycled air in a ship she didn't know. She thought about 43 audio recordings, and a 19-year-old with salvaged equipment and 8 months of patience, and a father's voice he had been trying to send home for most of his life. She thought about what it meant that the message had finally gotten through. Not through channels, not through procedure. Through a sergeant in an oversized jacket standing on a wet rock ledge above 40 meters of dark water, deciding he had no better option and choosing anyway. Vetheras testified for 4 hours. She was precise and comprehensive, and she did not omit anything. She described the broadcast. She described the 9-day period. She described the content of her conversations with a human prisoner in exact detail, including the 45 minutes about the light in the high country of Wyoming, which she noted as relevant contextual data because she had decided it was. She testified that in 17 years of studying humanity, she had found them to be strategically complex, culturally adaptive, militarily unpredictable, and emotionally sophisticated in ways that Tyrusian military assessment models had consistently undervalued, not because the data wasn't there, but because the models were not designed to measure what they measured. She testified that she had personally encountered, in a single engagement, evidence that corrected several of her own prior conclusions. She said, speaking to the council in her own language, "I came to this world believing I knew what I would find. What I found instead was a question I had not asked. I am here because I believe we cannot answer it by proceeding with the current operational plan." She said, "I believe we can answer it, but not this way." The council debated for 11 days. There were factions who wanted to continue. There were factions who wanted to withdraw. There were 3 ship commanders who had been quietly building something in the weeks since the broadcast, a coalition of officers who had listened to a dead emperor's voice and found they could not continue without at least asking the question he had asked. The vote was not unanimous. It was not even close to unanimous, but it was a majority. The occupation went into suspension pending a formal review of the authorization documents. It was not over. It was, as Vetheras had said, in motion. She was in her cabin when the news came through. She was reading a human book, an old one, something Hale had mentioned in one of their conversations that she had tracked down in an archive. She set it down when the message came and read the message twice, and then looked at the book for a while. Later, she sent a message to the temporary resettlement facility, where Hale had been transferred 2 weeks earlier, pending resolution of his status. The message said, "The vote was for suspension. Nothing is decided, but it is moving." The reply came back 6 minutes later, "That's something." She read it. She thought about the definition of something. She thought about 11 hours in a cell and 40 meters of dark water, and a signal relay pack on a wet rock ledge, and a 4-minute broadcast that had changed something she still couldn't precisely name. She wrote back, "Yes, that's exactly what it is." She set the device down. She picked up the book. She read for a long time in the quiet of her cabin, in orbit above the blue-gray planet, while below, in the world that was still contested and still in motion, people who were not so different from each other in the ways that mattered kept trying to find an option better than the ones they had. Outside the porthole, the planet turned, slow, unhurried, the way things turn when they have time or when they have decided to take it. She turned the page.